Hello and welcome to this short video on Tableau Server version 8.1 support for external load balancers. My name is Neelesh Kamkolkar and I'm a product manager here at Tableau. This video is primarily targeted towards Tableau Server administrators that are already familiar with Tableau Server and its components, and also perhaps have a Tableau Server instance running in an HA scenario. Support for ELB enables Tableau Server Gateway to automatically failover. We do that by allowing now in version 8.1 for the gateway process to be split across all of the nodes in the Tableau Server deployment. So gateway process is now completely decoupled from the primary. And also, every node in the cluster should have a gateway that is running and available to be able to support a Tableau cluster running behind an external load balancer. The implementation for ELB support is agnostic to the ELB itself. However, configuration for each ELB might be unique, and you'll need to work with your IT team to ensure that your ELB is configured appropriately to work with Tableau Server behind the external load balancer. We also separated out a few of the roles that the gateway and the primary play. So the gateway primarily in version 8.1 will only accept and route inbound requests. Note that the gateway is now available on all the nodes in the cluster, so it's aware that it's behind an ELB, and the primary function it serves is just routing inbound requests. The primary node in the cluster serves as the administrative node, and this includes functions like licensing, tab admin, running tab admin, and search services, etc. So let's take a quick look at a three-node architecture. If you have an existing deployment such as this, which is you have one primary with a gateway installed on it, you have a worker with all the components and an active repository running on it, and you have second worker that's running a standby repository with all the components. The way to bring that particular deployment into the ELB fold is to make sure that you have the gateway running on the remaining two workers. So you have the gateway on the primary. Make sure you enable and run the gateway on worker 1 and worker 2. The second step is make sure that all of the three machines are in the load balancer's client pool. This ensures that if any one of the nodes goes down, the others are continuing to service the end users. So let's see what happens, for example, in the case where worker 1 goes down, and it is the one that's hosting the active repository. So when worker 1 goes down, worker 2 has a heartbeat that it is using to monitor all the other nodes. So essentially, in an HA deployment, all the nodes in the cluster have a heartbeat that monitors the availability of the other nodes in the cluster. So in this case, when worker 2's heartbeat fails, it basically knows that worker 1 is down. And when it recognizes that worker 1 is down, and it is the one that is running the repository as a standby, it automatically goes ahead and promotes the repository to be active. And as soon as that happens, requests that are coming in from primary to worker 1 will now switch over to work with worker 2 automatically. Because the gateway on the primary here is smart to know that the other worker is down and to route the requests appropriately. Now let's see what happens in a failure situation. So if any of the gateway processes go down, or the box hosting the gateway goes down, if there's another gateway in the entire cluster, then the cluster continues to function. If the entire worker goes down, then if there's another worker in the cluster that has the same components, then the cluster continues to function. And if the primary goes down, in this particular scenario, because it is the administrative node where you're hosting licensing and other administrative functions, you have about 8 hours, which is the duration of license polling. So within that 8-hour window, or the amount of time that you would have from the last licensing check, you want to make sure that you bring the primary back up. So for this particular case, we definitely recommend that you have a backup primary so that in an event if the primary goes down, you have the backup to rely on for the licensing services to continue to work. So let's take a look at a multi-node architecture. In this particular architecture, you have one primary and 3 workers. They're all behind a load balancer. Worker 1 has the active repository and worker 3 has the standby repository. Note that every single node in the cluster has all of the server components running on it, including the gateways. So in this particular case, if any of the nodes goes down, Because there are all the components are running on all the nodes and the gateway is available on components, the cluster just continues to function. So let's see what happens if worker 1 goes down in this particular situation. If worker 1 goes down, the request starts to fail, and some of the heartbeats are missed. And worker 3 automatically detects that and promotes the standby repository to the active repository. And from this point onwards, all of the requests that are originating from the end user or the load balancer are continually being served because all 3 nodes in the system are continuing to function. So let's take a look at what happens in a 2-node scenario. In a 2-node scenario, you have a primary and a worker that are behind a load balancer. The primary is running the active repository, and worker 1 is running the standby repository. So in this case, when either one of those nodes in the cluster goes down, it's unclear which of the nodes is actually down. So for example, if the primary goes down, does worker 1 assume that the primary has gone down, or could it be that worker 1 has some issue with its networking, and it is the one that it isn't able to originate a heartbeat to worker or to the primary? And in fact, the primary is the healthy one here in this case. So this is typically called as a split brain scenario in HA deployments. And Server 8.1 allows you to configure an external host. This doesn't have to be another Tableau Server instance or doesn't have to be running any of the Tableau Server processes. But as long as the nodes in the cluster are able to reach a machine on a specified port and establish a connection, it basically validates that that particular node is the healthy node between the two. And the other one implicitly is the one that's failed. So in this case, if the primary goes down, worker 1 cannot directly assume that the primary is actually down. If the heartbeat fails on worker 1, it could be that worker 1 is the one that's having networking problems. So in this case, the only way worker 1 can validate that it is the healthy node in the cluster is to connect to the external host, make sure that it is able to make a successful connection, and then go back and promote the standby repository to an active repository, and then continue to service the requests. All of this happens behind the scenes and transparent to the users. Okay, so in this video, we learned that 8.1 version of Server supports external load balancers. We allow automatic failover of the gateway starting in 8.1. And also, the easy way to bring an existing deployment of a Tableau server behind a load balancer and to get it configured is to make sure you do 2 critical things. One is ensure that you're running the gateway process on all of the nodes in the cluster. And 2 is you make sure that the client pool in the load balancer has all of the nodes in the cluster reflected in it. Hope this video has been helpful. I look forward to seeing you on another video. Thank you.